All right, fact check this podcast. And I thought I was going to be doing this on X, but since I have had to go private, can't do that. But we're on YouTube and Rumble anyway. And tonight I am joined by Kruptos. And I don't know about you, but I had no intention tonight of talking about the stuff that happened over the weekend or anything like that. I actually think the stuff that we're talking about might be it might be more important to the long-term politics of the U.S. and things that are going on. So if you are looking for discussions about what happened over the weekend with Trump and everything else, 2-Bit is currently doing a stream on that with Matt Erickson, Dimes, Thomas777, and Pete. They will be talking about all of that, and we will not be. We're going to talk about the managerial state. But first, I'll let you introduce yourself because you haven't been on the show before, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Well, yeah, I'm really happy to be on here and delighted that you asked me. And I always love talking about the managerial state and Elul and other things like that. It's I've been doing this for a little while now. I'm not quite an old hand, but sometime during COVID, we were doing an all-over house renovation from top to bottom. We had made the decision not to buy a bigger house than the one we have, and part of that decision was that we were going to renovate it from top to bottom. And while COVID was on, I was doing this renovation and started listening to Charles Haywood's podcast, and then started emailing him. And he's gracious enough to reply. And after a while, he said, some of this responses are really good. You should do some writing. And so he said, I can introduce you to a couple people. But he said, oh, wait a minute. It's probably better if you just sort of, post some stuff online first. And I researched how to do that, started a Substack, and then thought how to promote my Substack, got into Twitter as a result, when you could still promote things on Twitter. And the rest is kind of history, as they say. So that's sort of me. And I'm a non in part because I have a business, and this sort of thing makes my wife nervous. So to honor her, she sort of says, I'd really like you to be anonymous. And partly also too, because the anon thing is that ideas and thoughts tend to bend themselves towards power. That's one of the reasons why we have an anonymous vote. And so, and so anonymity allows you to have a little bit more courageous. Now, I'm not, I don't go out of my way to be offensive and some of these things, but we do say things that are shocking to some people. One of the main things that I discovered when I got online is, as I was watching other people's political analysis, I began noticing that there were some, what I would consider, holes in people's analysis, because I had read a fair bit of Jacques Ellul. And so I just started sharing some of the insights that I had, talking about the managerial state and so forth, and writing some threads. And it began to resonate with people. And it turns out that's one of these things about growing an account. If you can find a niche of things that not too many other people are talking about, and you can seem to talk about it in ways that people appreciate and find helpful, it allows your account to grow. And so that's kind of what happened to me. And I also did some writing on Elul on my Substack, and I will often do that kind of analysis on my my Twitter feed as well too. I just finished reading Jacques Ellul's propaganda. What is it? What's the subtitle? But anyways, it's his book on propaganda, and so I'll be writing about that in the near future. So that was a big deep dive. I probably have about 80 pages worth of notes, so we'll see how many pieces that ends up being. So there we go. That's sort of maybe the quick introduction to what I do and who I am. And if you hear the noise, that's my printer going off in the background. So somebody in the house is printing something.
Not a problem. Speaking of the Substack, that actually kind of brings up the topic of today. This is a excellent piece about managerial Christianity. And as I was kind of reading through it and thinking about my own life and career, specifically my career, I've been in management pretty much since I left the farm. My entire professional career has been some level of management on different corporate levels, or working for private businesses and stuff, and then as I work in management and I look at the church and I look at managerial Christianity and reading that stuff, and having worked inside of a large local non-denominational church and the way that they do a lot of their business, and then looking at politics and seeing the way that a lot of politics is done, and then just having been on varying scales of corporate America and seeing the way that everything is done with that as well, it's all highly managed and usually not well. So I wanted to start with how does everything seem to end up boiling itself down to the managerial state? Like you talk about it in the piece with Christianity and the way the churches end up being kind of managed instead of being an institution of promoting the gospel. It becomes this thing that is trying to build itself, build its numbers, build its congregation, and then build its ties. And what's the best way we can streamlining Christianity is what it ends up becoming. But you see that across every single aspect of really the world that we live in. How do things, in your view of looking at it, how do things end up like boiling themselves down to everything is just overly managed?
It's been a long process. So this is not something that just happened in like the last 10 years, but began really in the middle of the 1700s, actually, with the rise. It sort of in earnest, and probably goes back even farther than that, but it really begins with the rise of the merchant classes coming out of the end of the late Middle Ages. So you can probably trace the earliest roots back to like the 1400s. Things like double entry bookkeeping, little innovations like that. So you when you take the long history of things back way into time, but things really start to begin to take off in earnest in the 1700s, during the Revolutionary era, and then up through industrialization. And so there was a time of what Ellul calls social plasticity during that time. So probably beginning with the Reformation and some of the things that were going on before that, with the Renaissance. And so there was an increasing amount of social displacement and what he calls social plasticity. And then there was a number of things sort of coming all together. I'm trying to pull up there was a much older piece that I wrote, and I'll see if I can pull it up while I'm talking here. And then in the midst of this, what ends up happening is that concerns that the business community, so what you would call the merchant class, begin to start to dominate society. So what businesses really want is they want consistent outcomes. They want to be able to, in that sense, manage quality, but they're looking for things that can produce consistent output and things that are in many ways person invariant. Right? So what happens is as society begins to move out of the older ways of doing things that was very person-centric, they're looking to, in a sense, take the people out of it. Now, part of this is a power issue. So the ancient regime of the way things were run is that you put someone in charge, and that person was in charge. So you would use, Lord Humblebolt, and he would be put in charge of the money, and he would become the exchequer of the crown, and he would be the guy that would manage the money. And there were no systems in place. There were not really any regulatory things. If he managed the money well, he managed the money well. If he managed the money poorly, he probably lost his head. These sorts of things, right? But it was very much dependent upon persons. And And so in a part of this period, what Jacques Ellul traces is you can trace it to various turning points. One example that he uses is Napoleon, standardized like the libraries and the bookkeeping practices within the government. So there was, and what it introduces is this sort of standardization for consistent outcome. You want to create person invariant results, and you want them reproducible over time. And this was really aided in many ways by the introduction of industrialization. And industrialization really sort of, this is when things begin to take off in earnest. And then through this process, the basic social structure of society is broken down, and the factory comes to dominate. So let's see, this is sort of the piece that I wrote is for your audience. If they're looking back, this is one of the ones, I think it says it's a paid piece, but I guess it is. But it's called Technique, Propaganda, and the Left Liberal Nature of the West. So there is, it's paid because it's so far back. It's now as part of the archives. So you would have to, because of the subscription, unfortunately. So in this, what he argues is that it emerges. What were the conditions? Oh, here we go. So he says there's a long incubation period of technical experience and gradual technical improvement over time that primes the pump for a tipping point. Along with a population expansion, there's a suitable economic environment, a period of social plasticity, and then what he calls a clear technical intent. Okay, so the idea is we've been tool using people as human beings, right? So, what's the difference between a tool using person and the technological society? Well, with a tool using person, the person is the decisive element in making a tool work. So you're used to like with woodworking tools, for example, if you're making a chair and you have hand tools, what makes the hand tools really sing is your ability as the user of the tool to make the hand tools do what they're supposed to do and more. You have a simple number of tools that then you can use to create a whole range of outcomes and processes. But really what's decisive is you as a tool user. Now, we also have to understand that there are other tools that are not like tools. So you think of things like a legal system is a tool, but in a more organic, natural community, much of what makes a legal system work is embedded in the culture of the society. So you can have a small number of rules that are, say, written down, but everybody knows the meaning of those rules, and they can be applied in a wide range of situations based upon the ability of, say, like the wisest guy in the village. So you have a village council, they apply all the rules to the various situations come up, but they have a handful of rules and an ingrained culture that sort of lives within the community. And then these rules are applied to a wide range of situations. So what's decisive is not the rules, but the people who are interpreting the rules and the culture that reinforces it. So what Ellul argues is that with the technological society, the transition from there to what we have now, we have to understand that the most important thing about the technological society and technology itself is not the actual devices or machines that we use, but technique is a way of thinking about the world. So one of the examples that I've kind of come up with is to picture say an old castle. You have all these functions in the castle, but you've got a stables. So you have the king's horses, and these are what maintained for his knights or whatever. And you have a bunch of stable hands of varying rank. But over all of it, you have the stable master. Now, he might be a member of the lower nobility. He might be a commoner, but the stable master is in charge of the stable. And likely, he learned how to run a stable from the ground up. He began as a stable boy. His father, maybe farmed him out as an apprentice to become a stable boy. He learned everything. He showed that he was competent in taking care of animals, in managing the stable, learned everything about how to care for the horses, how to, maintain all of the tack, how to look for illnesses, how to feed them, how to exercise them, all of the things of the running of the stable. And that stable master, he's in charge. So he knows that if, say, a number of the master, the Lord's horses die, he's held responsible for it. These types of things, right? So this is all learned organically. It's all embedded in the memory of everybody who's involved in the stable hands. Now, what happens in the modern things, and to kind of use the example sort of to draw it as stark as possible, is the way that the technological society works is that you would say, call up McKinsey and Company, and they would bring in the consultants, and the consultants would then, they zoom into the stable and they examine everything, sit down with everybody, interview them about everything that they do, all of the levels. And what they do then is they take everything that everybody's doing and they rationalize it. So they pull it out of the embedded context that it's in, they turn it into a series of bullet points, into a series of rationalized processes, they label it all, and they then produce a report, right? So now they've got all of this stuff that it's all abstracted. You can think of like Taylorism, time and motion studies, right? And they do all this time and motion studies. Now that they've taken this, analyzed this, all this stuff, they don't even actually need the stable. So what they will do is they'll go back to New York or wherever, Boston or wherever the offices for McKinsey Company, and they'll sit in their meeting rooms, and then they'll try to figure out how best to improve the processes of the stable. And some of them, they may even look at it and say, hey, we can automate this process. We can develop systems. We can introduce some computer systems into here. Then what will happen is they will reintroduce this rationalized system into the stable, and it's no longer embedded in the memory of the people in the stable. It's now, the decisive thing is now the plans and policies that come from this rationalized process, and people are then trained into the policy manual. So if there's a problem, maybe nobody gets fired, but what they do is they go back and they have a meeting, and then they re-engineer the processes to fix the problems. And then what can happen is, and this is how these systems integrate, is once they've got this really refined, they've got all of their techniques in place, they've got all of the mechanized programs in place, and it's all made, maybe they fire everybody in and just hire some people because now they can produce consistent results with the animals or whatever. They don't necessarily need all of these expensive, highly trained, it takes like your whole life to basically learn how to be a stable person. They can just bring in people and they can train them up, in 3 weeks to do the job of a stable person. They can reduce costs in the, employee wage costs. And then when that's all said and done, now that they have this rationalized system, they can now export it like a franchise. So what becomes important now is the idea of the stable and not the stable itself. So this now becomes a portable idea that can then be applied in other stables to bring about now best practice. So now you have best practices for a stable. And this is kind of how it works. So this is the sort of the difference between a kind of rationalized process. And what Ellul argues in the technological society is this type of thing that's happening in this fictional stable is happening all across society, like in every area of life. It's happening in government, it happens in business, it happens in the universities, it's happening in the hospitals, it's happening in your NGOs, it's happening in your parachurch organization, it's happening in your churches. And basically, he argues that in the end, what happens is that you have really only one solution for every problem, and that's a technical solution. So you begin, if you've got a problem in your church, it's not growing, what do? Well, you go jonesing around for the latest franchise plan to implement in your church to create a growing church. And so all of the solutions become, in many ways, identical. They all become integrated. They all grow into sort of a homogeneous system. And then people wonder, why is capital going woke? In a sense, because capital runs on the same operating system that the government does. And here's the interesting thing. And this is where it becomes. So if we dovetail that into something that Marshall McLuhan, the philosopher, says, the medium is the message, is that, and what McLuhan argued is that the system in many ways is more important than its content. So for example, what's decisive, say, about a television is not the programming that's on the television, but it's the fact of the television itself. So while it might be better to watch porn or to watch wholesome programming rather than porn, whether you're watching porn or you're watching wholesome programming, you're still a couch potato that's overweight with a 3-second attention span. So he says the technology will have its own effects. And what Ellul argues is that the technologies don't care. They're neither good nor bad. They're just ambivalent. And so when you introduce a technology into society, it will have good effects, it will have bad effects, but the technology itself will have effects in some sense, regardless of the content by which it's used. So this is the sense, and what Ellul argues is that the technological system is, in a sense, an expression of the scientific and progressive mindset. So if we think of how we learn scientific knowledge, right? You have a theory, you develop a set of ways of testing the theory, you test it with experiments, then you get your results, and then from this results, you develop a new hypothesis, and in theory, your knowledge begins to progress step by step by step. You do the same thing in organizations. The idea with the organizations is you start with we first send in the consultants, and we do all the learning, then we reintroduce the plan, and then we have some problems, so we go back, take that new data, and then rejig the plan. And the idea is that as we rejig this plan, we're supposed to continually get better and better and better and better. And so you can see that the very idea of technical administration, this administration, is in itself progressive. The idea is to be progressive. Now, Ellul argues is that in part, you never in the end get there. So what happens is as you keep doing layers of technology, you keep developing problems with every technology that you introduce to fix the old problems. And so what happens is your problems begin to get more complex and your solutions get to be more complex, but you never actually arrive at a point where you reach this kind of utopian end. And you can see this, say, like in a church, for example, when you introduce a church plan, how are they sold to us? These revival plans, it's almost pitched like it's revolutionary. So we have, church utopia, the big, vibrant church where people are flooding in, our coffers are full, and it's exciting, and everybody wants to be there, right? And what do we have now? Well, we have these tired old traditions, and they're stodgy, and and so what we need to do is sweep away the current regime, introduce the technical plan, and this technical plan will bring us to church nirvana, to the promised land of the vibrant, utopian church. And that's in a sense, so inherent in the very structure of all of these administrative systems, they're inherently married to the system of human progress. And this idea that we are progressing. So you can say, why is everything, conquest law? Why does any organization that's left to its own devices continue to drift leftward? Well, because every organization that uses organizational systems at its heart is a left-leaning organization. So you actually have to actively fight the nature of that organization to keep it conservative. Because if you leave it alone, its natural instinct is to liberalize, because that's the way that technical systems operate. And that's why conservatism seems so out of place, and why when you look around at the landscape, like, why are there no conservatives? Because there are no conservatives. Anybody who has a solution or a plan is not a conservative. So that's the big picture. So that's the kind of fact. I know you can see you there. You're kind of like just tooling it around in your head. But that's kind of the big picture, I think. It's sort of the fast of it.
Well, and so I guess the big thing that's like sticking for me is at some point we stopped looking for the technology to make it better for the individuals who were doing it. Because, when you talk about the stable master and the woodworking stuff, and like, I grew up on a farm, farming stuff. There's a lot of things with the farm that are, and agriculture as a whole, that it doesn't matter how scientific you want to get with it. It's art. It's not science. Yes. There's no technical way to make it happen other than dumb luck, and because I learned how to do it from my granddad, who learned how to do it from his granddad, and yes. This is this trick that we've learned. I can't remember. I think it was in a happy hour I was doing on Friday with friends and stuff from the Peddling Fiction podcast that I do. We were talking about different stuff, and I was like, I worked in the grain industry for a long time. And when you load barges, I actually had a manager, an upper level area manager, that he was like, whenever we bring the grain in, he said, we know what it is. He said, we test all of it. So we know we've got this moisture and this test weight and this much FM and this much damage, and we're putting it in these different bins, and it's all segregated. He said, why can't we just put it in there, and then when we go to load a barge, we already know what's in these bins. So we just set a certain percentage to come out of each and just let it run, and then we should have the perfect mix every time. And I said, because it doesn't matter how many times you do that, it will never, ever work. As much as you think that it sounds like it should just be a scientific, this is the way we do it, we set it and let it run, it never will. There is an art to this that you have to be able to check your samples and switch your bin, switch how much you're bringing out of each bin, and play with it and tinker with it on the fly. Like, you're never going to be able to just set it and forget it. That's not the nature of this business. Somewhere along the lines, humanity, I guess, stopped trying to find ways to make it easier and more efficient for that guy to do that job, and started trying to just make it where you don't
They don't need that guy.
Yeah, the guy doesn't matter at all. And like that, and so that's where we end up moving from. And I feel like that's somewhere.
There's what I call the inflection point. Like, where is the inflection point?
Yeah, and I feel like it's like, I don't know, sometime after Henry Ford maybe, but I'm not sure where to peg it down exactly. But somewhere the guy who's actually doing the job stopped mattering at all. And so then you get into, the people that you're talking about, the consultants that come in and they look at everything and they have absolutely no idea about anything. Like, they know from a micro and macro management course load that they took in college what the books say about this type of an industry and how it should work. And so now they're going to be looking at all of it from like what you actually do on the job doesn't matter at all to them. And so I feel like what we've ended up with is a managerial class that is effectively retarded in the way of the actual business that they're trying to manage. And also, they have no connection to the workers that you're trying to, or the people. I mean, even if we're not talking about, the corporate world, if we're talking about government or we're talking about the church, like, they don't actually have a connection to the people in those organizations that they're trying to bring along to this, amazing utopian success. All of the important pieces of the puzzle, they don't even care about those. It's all about just how can we streamline everything into this perfect, everything fits in these perfect little boxes.
Well, and that's really the promise of AI, is that you have the computing power now that you can finally manage it without people. The real allure of it all, excuse me, the real allure of it all is that these technical systems allow you to manage things at scale, and in a sense raise the floor of consistency. So you can bring in people who are maybe not quite as capable at a lower rate and make them produce consistent outcomes. So you can produce consistent outcomes at scale. And that's the other thing that allows you to do is to scale production and society and power up to create these like and with each level of scale, the rewards of both power and money are increasingly great. And so the lure is to always centralize, to make everything work at greater and greater scale, and to mechanize it as much as possible, because The embedded knowledge that you're talking about, that is there, that exists in people, is a source of power. And that embedded knowledge, this is why machines, in a sense, you break down the guild, you think. So they're trying to break down the power structure. There's a good example right now in the London taxi industry, what they call the knowledge. So they're trying to, you have to go through these rigorous multi-year long exams to know every nook and cranny of the city, every restaurant, every barber, every site that you could see, the what they call the knowledge of the city, every back route, everything. People have said, well, let's automate that, and then we can cut these taxi drivers out, and we can reduce the rates of the taxi drivers. And the taxi drivers are like, well, this is our knowledge. This is what makes us who we are. This is what gives us value, right? So, but the wizards of smart are always looking to reduce costs, improve productivity, increase outcomes, increase the consistency of the outcomes, increase quality, all of these basic metrics that they're trying to produce. And so any way that they can rid the system of embedded knowledge, they will do that, and to mechanize it and systematize it and turn it and abstract it. They will take that opportunity, because that takes power away from people and puts it in the system, and it basically lends it in the hands of the upper managers. Now, what's interesting about that whole process, Eamon Fingleton, what is it? It's something about his book on heavy industry, like basically the case for heavy industry. And what Fingleton argued, he says, somewhere along the line, the wizards of smart assumed, and this is sort of maybe your top 10% of the quote unquote ideas guys, who figured that all manufacturing, all of these types of products, the important thing is the idea, right? I think it's called In Praise of Heavy Industry, something like that. What we figured that we could do is that the actual manufacturing process was largely irrelevant. What was important was the idea, and this is what we've been talking about, but we can ship the manufacturing overseas. But what they discovered is in any manufacturing operation, even one that's highly sophisticated, uses expensive computer systems like AI related, that there is always a limit to what the computer systems and the manufactured systems can do, that at a certain point in time you need human judgment. And that human judgment is all of those spaces in the cracks, as you say, make everything sometimes that a system that seems like it should be able to be rationalized but can't. It's that human judgment that makes it work, like the mixing of different grains and so forth in the moment, that can be done by people, but machines can't seem to manage it. So oftentimes when you ship factories overseas, you lose a generation or more of knowledge. So you think, we're going to repatriate our industries. You would then have to relearn a generation's worth of all of that fine-tuned knowledge, because you can't abstract everything fully. But so that's sort of one of those problems at the limit. And what we also discover as you push the bounds of these systems is that your system becomes increasingly more fragile. So an example that Alul uses is your old jalopy. Now, like an old jalopy, you've got like say a 350 Chevy truck, and you drive it, and you've got this 30-year-old truck, and it works great. You can keep a box of tools in the truck, and you can basically work on it on the fly pretty much anywhere you go. You can get parts anywhere you want to get it. This thing runs forever because the design is ancient, and all the parts have been tested and vetted, and all the bugs have been worked out of them, and they just last forever. I had a Chevy Suburban for 10 years. I think the only thing I ever replaced on it were brakes, spark plugs, and U-joints. For whatever reason, they can't make the U-joints on those things last, right? But then you take from that old jalopy and you bring it up to the Formula One race car. Well, Formula One race cars are beautiful machines of engineering, but how many Formula One race cars don't even finish a race, right? Because they have a breakdown. And the whole thing needs to be stripped down and rebuilt anyway. So a perfect example of this is logistics. It used to be that when you wanted products delivered, you had a manufacturing process. In order to maintain a steady supply of parts, you would have to keep warehouses of stored parts, so that way you never ran out on the assembly line. Somebody said, hey, you know what, with computer systems and global logistics, we can squeeze out all of the inefficiencies in the system, and we can bring products to the bay doors of the manufacturing, all of the parts that we need the day that they're going to be assembled. And we can do this on a global scale. And they can, but they discovered, say, during COVID, right, that you introduce a small shock into the system, and all of a sudden, oh, we don't have any computer parts from Taiwan. We can't even make Diet Coke, because you know where aspartame comes from? China, right? And then, like, just down the line, oh, you have no aspirin to reduce fevers for people in the hospital. Well, where does aspirin come from and Tylenol? Oh, the key ingredients all come from China. And then you get things like, oh, goods have to pass through the Suez Canal, but now you're having problems with Houthi rebels. Oh, shoot, now you can't build automobiles in New Jersey because you have shipping containers that are sitting there waiting because it's too dangerous to bring them through the Red Sea right now. All of these types of things. And so what happens is you've built this global supply chain that runs basically like a Formula One race car. And increasingly throughout the world, more and more things are run like a Formula One race car. And at a certain point in time, this is in a sense what the competency crisis is about is, are we on a global scale actually running out of enough competent people to manage these high-end systems that we've created for ourselves? I'm of the mind that we are. And not only that, and here's the kicker, is that one of the things that makes us smarter is exercising our brain power in the old way that we used to do it using tools, because when we were the decisive element in the tools, that forced us to be very smart and skilled and gifted. But when the machines do it all for you, your brain gets lazy. And so the very technical system that we built is making us stupider. And you can track the drop in IQ. So you could say things, well, it's chemicals, it's diet, it's probably all of that. But it's actually the encounter with a machine world where we're giving over more of our core competencies over to the machines makes us increasingly not as smart as we were 3 generations ago, because 3 generations ago, you still had to use your brain to make stuff. And now we don't have to make our brain. So that's kind of, sort of to center it in sort of, that's the technological system and some of the problems we place. But now we're, churched environment, which is probably where we're going to get to eventually anyways here. But that's, I don't know if you have anything to add, Justin.
Well, you talked about, you and I talked a bit about like woodworking and stuff like that, and having a shop before we started. And I was talking about gutting and renovating the house that we currently live in, and there were some things that when we were doing that my wife would be like, you can get this, we can go to Lowe's or to Home Depot and get this tool that'll do that for you. I'm like, yeah, but I can just do it, and it means more to me that I'm doing it than to just go get this tool and let the tool do it and then just stick it in. Like, I'm actually building this house, from we gutted it out by hand. I'm building it back, myself.
I'm the decisive element here.
Right. And I know how to do it. When I was doing that, I would take pictures daily and send them to my brother. And my brother's really good with mechanic type stuff, but not so much with building type stuff. And he was like, man, I wish I'd learned how to do some of that stuff when we were younger. I was like, yeah. I wish I knew how to do some of the mechanic stuff that you're a lot better at than I am. I was like, there's trade-offs. I learned some things and you learned other things. But talking about the competency crisis, like when we're shipping those jobs off, the amount of, so a lot of the stuff that I know how to do in, like when I was working in the grain industry, I learned how to do all of the maintenance work because there was some old maintenance dude that made a career out of building grain elevators back in the 60s and 70s that when I was coming up, he didn't have the energy to get up and down ladders and bins and stuff like that. And I did, and I was eager to learn, and I had basic mechanical skills that I picked up from, stuff that I learned in machine shop and a mechanic shop or auto shop and carpentry, coming up through the vocational school in high school. So I could pick up on that stuff. So they would teach me how to do that stuff. And then now I get to go work on this stuff, and I'm both learning from them and learning hands-on on the fly. And then I get to teach other people how to do that stuff. When you
secret knowledge,
when you streamline a system and just ship it overseas, all of that's gone. Like,
all that knowledge is gone.
right.
And the people that used to have this knowledge, that and the people that they were supposed to pass it on to, they may get UBI or they work at Denny's or whatever now, but they end up becoming fentanyl addicts because, what drove them before and what gave their life value in some sense was the secret knowledge that they possessed. And whether that was a secret knowledge of the little things that ran in the factory, and it was an entry-level factory job, there was a whole bunch of secret knowledge of learning how to make those machines work efficiently on a day-to-day basis that was taken from them. And now that whole area of meaning is just, it's lost from them.
And on top of that, so then you build on that competency crisis of not only do we not have the people in place actually doing this stuff, but the people who are supposed to be streamlining these processes and making things more efficient, they don't have those people to draw from to manage it going forward. So now the processes that are being put in place are missing big steps. You were talking about the AI stuff and everything, and I've talked about this before. The system that we run at work is effectively just a step down from AI. Like, it's this supposedly highly intuitive, like, it knows what we're shipping out, and so it just goes through and allocates everything, and now all of this stuff is coming to be able to be loaded. Most of my job is watching what the system is doing and telling it, stop, don't do that, do this instead, because you're adding 3 steps to something that could be done in 1, because the system it's only as smart as its programming. And it doesn't see what's actually going on in the plant with the people doing it, with the trucks that need to be getting loaded. Like, it's only as smart as what its program will allow it to be. And that takes away the ability to adjust on the fly. And I don't know if AI will ever be able to adjust on the fly in the way that a human process.
I don't think it will.
I mean, I've complained about my washing machine I don't know how many times, because my washing machine, I might overload it a little bit. And now, when all my washing machine needs to do is just spin and get the water out, it'll sit there and say that it can't spin because the load's unbalanced, or the load's too heavy, or whatever. And it'll just continue. It doesn't matter if I pull everything out and put it all back in. I can put a shop vac in there and suck some of the water out of it. It will not run because it thinks there's something wrong. And I don't care if it's off balance and it walks halfway across the house, or if it burns all the belts off and I have to replace them. I just need it to spin the water out, but it won't do it. Like, there's a certain level where it has been given too much intelligence, and now it's too smart for its own good to even do the job, the very basic job that just needs to get done. And you see that in the processes and the systems. The more complicated and intelligent that they make them, the more they seem to want to do really dumb stuff.
And that's in a sense because they're, in this sense, they're so abstracted. But it's also, I think, a function. This is what Elul argues, is that you never eliminate all the negatives from the system. Like, you just can't. There's all these unexpected things that crop up that have to be dealt with in the moment, and the programming is incapable. The systems cannot see far enough in advance to overcome them. Now, you could go back and document, and that's one of the things why you see in like your computer systems, why like, Windows and Apple and all these other computer systems want to document all the processes and things that go wrong, because they think that if they can document them all in real time, they can go back and fix them all and fix every one of those problems eventually and eliminate all the problems. But the problem is they fix all of those problems, they will open up new problems. And this is the thing that Elul document. And the systems don't really care. You never arrive at a point where all of the problems are entirely fixed. The other problem, as I was thinking about it too, and this is one of the things that you see among elite when you look at things like the WEF and some of these other high level organizations that are spouting their nonsense, right, is that they work off the assumption that if we can develop these computer systems, we can maintain the same level of wealth and status, but not have to deal with all of the masses of people at the bottom end. We can either pay them off with UBI or we just get rid of them entirely, but we can run this wealthy global system, and we can continue to live our exalted life, and we don't need all the rest of them. And what hasn't connected is that these systems at scale require everything to work at scale, in the sense that you need all of the constituent parts that are built up on this system to its maximum to create this wealth generating machine at the very top on the global scale. But if you begin to chip away at all of these pieces on the bottom and say, oh, we can get rid of that, we can get rid of this, we can get rid of that, we can get rid of this, eventually what happens is the whole system collapses out from underneath you, and they will never be able to maintain that same system of or that same level of prosperity at the very top end. And you can see this as empires collapse over and over again, is that one of the things that happens when empires collapse is that from a, when you talk about equity and, wealth equity, the best thing that could happen for wealth equity is a collapse of the global empire and everything to break apart and recede and everything. Now, it would be devastating for the people at the bottom, but it would also greatly reduce the gap between the top and the bottom. And so if you're looking for income inequality and to reduce income inequality, you basically want to blow up the global trade system, because that would do it pretty effectively. So that's kind of the other piece that goes along with it. So that's kind of, I think, the technological system in a nutshell, and some of the problems that we're facing at this end of it. There's others who have talked about it, like Joseph Tainter in The Collapse of Complex Societies argues that, from an input-output perspective, eventually, as you push economies to scale to their maximum in a society, that you get continually reduced outcomes from ever greater incomes, and you reach a point where your outcomes are no longer exceeding your inputs. And at that point, the society becomes very unstable, because people generally like to have greater outcomes than inputs. And so they will basically, break up, rebel, or whatever, or the system just collapses entirely under its own weight because it's unsustainable at that point. Tainter argues that we reached that point, the crest point, where our inputs and outputs are largely matched sometime in the 1970s. And that we're at the beginning of the end game for the Western civilization, even as it seems like we're reaching its zenith.
Well, I think that goes back to the competency crisis, though, because, we have new technologies and new stuff, but nobody knows what it does. Nobody knows how it works. Nobody can, I couldn't tell you the first thing about what to do with this damn thing if something went wrong with it and it broke. Now, on the other hand, if you give me a PlayStation 2 controller from 2000, or even a PlayStation 2 from 2000, I can take those things apart, pull parts out of them, tell you what's working, what's not, strip them down, take other ones that are also broken, rebuild them. I can tell you what's going on, but our technology has continued to advance to the point that it, I think Ben, I can't remember what he calls himself now. Ben Armani. He talked about everything that we have is basically magic. Nobody actually knows how any of this stuff works. Even the people that are building this stuff, they don't really know how it works. They just know how to keep it working in the event that it stops working. And even to some extent, there's some things that if it stops working, then you just throw it away and get a new one, because nobody actually knows how it works. They know they can build it and then it works. And then if it stops working, then you just throw it out and get another one that does, because there's no way to make it work again. We've crossed that threshold where what seems like technological advancements might actually be a step in the other direction, because because we do have such a competency crisis where nobody actually knows what's going on with any of this stuff. It's all, we just have it, and it's there, and God forbid it break.
And this is part of the thing that that Elul notes in the technological system, is because the system at some point, and there's a tipping point where we are no longer in charge of our tools are in charge of us. And so this is the sense, is that you become subservient to the technological system itself, where every answer for every problem is ultimately technological. And there can be no other solution other than a technological solution. And we're actually like frightened of solutions that aren't technological. So, for example, if you look at power politics, right? What's the one thing that we're absolutely terrified of doing? Putting somebody in charge. Just getting rid of all the rules and just them as a person, and just let them go in and fix it. And our eyes bug out, like, you can't do that. You need, like, people need to be subject to rules. And there was a time when that was how everything was run. You just found somebody that you trusted and put them in charge of something. That was the way they ran whole empires like that. And we look at that like, anybody that thinks about that is basically like the devil incarnate, that you have to have rules and policies and systems in place to protect people, to protect you from bad actors and all the rest of it. And this is what, in a sense, a rules-based system is all about. When we talk about the rule of law, at its extreme, the rule of law looks like the technological legal system. It's basically ruled by the policy manual. And this is how everything is managed across all of the systems, in churches included.
Ruled by the policy manual is, I think that plays a large factor in why I lost my first 2 jobs out of college. So, talking about they would just put somebody in to go do stuff. That's kind of what I did for the early part of my career. I was really good. I came from a farm background, and I understood ag, and I understood the equipment and the machinery that we used in the grain elevators and stuff. And so I had a lot of management jobs, but I was more the fixer. If there was something going wrong at a facility, then I got to go there, and I got to just kind of figure out what was wrong and fix it, whether it was crew or equipment or what have you. And that doesn't always fly real well with the people who are established upper level management in those facilities, because if you come in and start fixing everything that they've broken, now it really shines a light on how broken they had it. And so if you do anything against the policy manual, even though the policy manual might be wrong, now they're going to use that as grounds to go after you and run you out. So yeah, that kind of stuff really irks me.
Well, and here it gets even worse, Justin. So we talk a lot about the feminization of society, right? So we generally think of machines as masculine, right? Because guys use tools, right? That's kind of the way it works. Guys like tools. And so we generally think of machines as very masculine. And in many ways that is true. Guys like to make and design machines, and that's one of the things that we as men do. But when it comes to systems, one of the things that women like is indirect power. And so they like to be able to use proxies to affect power rather than dealing with it directly. So men, when they have a problem, it's trial by combat. I battle it out with you, and whoever wins either wins the argument, wins the fist fight, the duel or whatever, is the guy on top, and the other guy bends the knee and listens to the guy on top. And women don't like that kind of direct combat, and that's sort of just the nature. So they want to do things indirectly. So the policy manual and these regimes of indirect control and power. So everything from the things that we think about as being very good, like the meritocracy. So we have indirect means of evaluation that are non-personal, and we evaluate everybody and we put just the best people in place, right? Well, with men, you would just hire the guy that you trust the most and let him cut to it, right? So, but that's not good enough, because that basically is exclusionary. And now you're closing off positions to people. So at the one hand, these systems were designed to break down the old power structures of the old hierarchical power structures, which, when, the time of, say, like the American French Revolution, the old boys network were very inconsistent. They were lumpy. And the merchant classes didn't like them because they liked consistent outcomes. They want things to be predictable. They want their legal order to be predictable. And so they put in place systems that would break them down, one of them being the meritocracy. So we're not going to judge people on family lineage and who knows who. We're going to judge people simply on objective evaluated criteria. Well, the thing is that same evaluated criteria, you can put all the systems in place. But now if you say, well, what if instead of intelligence, the real criteria that we need to be paying attention to is inequity? So we're trying to make the system perfectly fair. So this is what happens: is the same tools that get put in, you give them a different content, and now these same tools are being used to institute something very different. And what you discover is that all of these systems that we put in place as men to manage and create consistent outcomes are the perfect environment for female managers to operate, because they like indirect power. They don't have to have direct confrontation. They can always hold the policy manual over people, and then exercise authority through the policy manual. So what you've created in implementing all of these systems is the perfect context within which to feminize culture. Now, at the same time, of course, the whole process of industrialization also destroyed the women's environment of the household, where they had all of their power and all of their meaning and everything else. So they destroyed the household. Women then went into the workforce to, they sold their labor. And what's the Greek word for the household? Oikonomia, the economy. And you say it's about the economy. So what happened is, as time went on and as these things, the women who used to run the household began to then move into and take over all of the positions in the merchants thing. They basically set up the household across the business world. And so now the household is no longer in the house; it's in the boardroom and in the management rooms and in the factory, anywhere where all of these indirect systems. So, and this is one of the things, is that all of these systems and tools and techniques that men built to make things more efficient have also at the same time feminized our society. So there's all of these nested problems, one within the other, within the other, within the other. And then this also, then we talk about, management, managerial Christianity. If you wonder why the churches have become feminized, well, this is one of the reasons why.
And that has also, I think, taken away the masculinity of even the men involved in the managerial system. You see the ones who aren't as good at the actual doing and understanding and implementing and working within what's actually being done. The ones who are, I don't want to say the more educated types, because that's not necessarily right. No. But in every industry that I've been in, the ones who are the more educated types that have a degree but no background,
practical experience,
right? They're the ones that act more feminine in those managerial roles and will use those systems to undercut the people who are actually really good at the things that they do, because they're a threat to their authority and their influence and their power. So it's incentivized feminism really for everybody involved in the system. It's not even really true meritocracy. It's just who can play the game.
And that's exactly it. And so in a sense, who can play the women's game the best in that, or is it the use of indirect power? So in that said regard, direct power is a threat always to the use of indirect power. And so, but you can use those systems to ward off the system from direct uses of power. So the guy who wants to get things done, because there is that sense of, like this is the Schmittian concept, right? Sovereign is he who decides the exception. So if you have a skill where you can go in and fix a problem, you have created an area of personal authority for yourself, right? Area of personal sovereignty. As we talked about it, earlier, one of the things that the systems tend to do is that what they want to do is to break down those areas of power and by squeezing it, because if you have sovereignty in an area where you're the guy who fixes things and goes in and fixes things, that has social and financial value. So you can demand more money, you can demand more authority, you can demand more respect. But if they can find a way to replace you with systems, then they can charge less, or they have to pay less for the labor costs. It disempowers them and empowers them at the same time. And that's part of this whole battle of why technology gets implemented, in a sense, is that you're looking to accumulate power, accumulate money, and these technical systems allow you to do this at scale.
That's why you always have to have that trump card in your back pocket of don't let them know everything that you know.
Well, that's secret knowledge, and that's one of those things. Yeah.
I had a boss that we did my annual review, and I sat down in his office, and he said, I honestly have no idea what you do, but every time you go on vacation, everything runs like shit. He said, so keep doing whatever it is, and this is the raising I'm going to give you. And I'm like, okay, cool.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And you're thinking like, yeah, I've got value here.
Yeah.
He needs me. Yeah. And that's something. Now, if you think about that on a social level, like let's say you turn what you're doing and you turn that into a guild, right? And all of that knowledge is internally held within a guild. You can imagine from a political perspective how powerful a guild can be. And this is one of the things I think that Oren has talked about. And this is why all of these old social types of structures had to be broken down, is because they create sources of political power, that secret knowledge that you would contain within it, how to make things, how to fix things. And if it's tightly contained and tightly held, that gives you economic and political power within inside, but it also gives you an ability to resist. So in your sense, you could resist the advances of higher management because your boss knows you're valuable. So your boss will keep higher management off your back, right? Or you can just basically give higher management the middle finger anyways, and they know you can't get rid of you because you have a power in a sense that they can't, because you have that secret knowledge, they can't replace you. And so there is this sense from if you think of like a social perspective, all of these pockets of political power that are held, then those become a threat to the ability of the state to exercise power at scale as well too. And that's why they had to be broken down. And that's why in many ways they were intentionally broken down to accumulate power and wealth. And they continue to do so. Every area of expertise that they will try to find a way to automate it and to mechanize it, and then basically replace all of the workers with either machines or with entry-level workers who can then be trained into the systems. And that's one of these one of these sort of intents of the system. In a sense, basically, you're talking about killing the middle class, but the idea is to take all of the knowledge that's held of how to do things within the broader society and rationalize it, abstract it, systematize it, and then push wages down because you can now basically hire, a 95 IQ guy who can just, more or less follow the policy manual. And that's sort of, I think, the intent of the system. If not, it replace him with a robot outright.
That's interesting. So this gives me a lot to think about on top of...
And we haven't talked very much about managerial Christianity at all yet.
No. We might do that. We might dig more into the Christianity side of it later, because just establishing the managerial state and where all of it comes from it's a lot, because it, like we talked about at the beginning, it's not just in Christianity, it's in government, it's in almost every aspect of our lives, everything that we see. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do.
It's the base operating system. Like it's the source code for modernity.
So there's
And that's why
a comment.
And that's why, in a sense, like when this is why when I got into Twitter and I started doing this kind of analysis, like, okay, guys, you're looking at the surface. Let's take it 3 steps deeper and look at the source code of what's really going on. And this technological system is why it doesn't matter which political party is in power, because the content is irrelevant. Like the television, the content is irrelevant because the system itself will drive the outcomes. They become technological in nature. Anyways, it looks like there were some questions there.
Yeah. So Mr. Person says, I wonder if this is why it seems to at least to me that many trades aren't as feminized as the more white collar jobs. Yeah,
that's exactly it.
Yeah, the more hands-on it is, the more you're reliant on that secret knowledge and the actual human element of stuff.
And the more connected you are to physical reality as well, too, also ground you. This is why even though farming has become very technologized and industrialized, why farmers are still a source of political power, because there is an inherent knowledge in growing things that just simply cannot be mechanized. And farmers are grounded in a way that in a sense, the regime needs food as well, too. So farmers become a political bloc that, and this is like in Europe with the farmer things that, they work to break the power of farmers as well, too.
One, and there are so many outside elements that you can't account for in farming, no matter how much you try. Like talking about the building the system, and then, the one little thing goes wrong, and now the whole system is. The weather changes literally every day, and
yes.
Market fluctuations, everything. My brother and I have been. My brother's he took over the farm. My dad officially retired at the end of last year, so this is my brother's first full on, just he runs the farm himself year, and he's already seen probably the worst wheat crop that they've had in 20. In fact, I had just gotten into the industry, into the grain industry 20 years ago, which was the last time they had the same weather patterns that they've had this year, where as the wheat was maturing, they caught a whole bunch of rains. And yes, and then it dried out just enough to start harvesting, and then it started raining again. And it wouldn't stay dry long enough for them to get in the field. And basically every time it gets rain on the wheat, and then it dries down, and then it gets rain again and it dries down, it's losing test weight, which is very important. And
that's right. I know enough of when I was a pastor, I served in a couple of rural churches, so I've got a crash course in basic farming. It's so funny when you get into a real farming community, people in the suburbs think, we need to pray for rain for the farmers. And I'd be sitting there thinking, like, I've been looking at the weather patterns. These farmers don't want any rain right now. They need sun and heat.
But then that also makes for, when they do get the rains like that, it ruins the wheat crop, but it makes for a good corn crop. And if they got early beans, it makes the beans look really good. So my brother and I have been talking a lot over this past year, because I worked in the grain elevator side of it, and I understand how the markets work as well, and what the markets are going to do, the way they fluctuate and stuff, and when he wants to be looking to sell his grain. He's really good on the mechanical and the actual doing side, and then I'm better on the back end side of it. So I've been having a lot of conversations with him about that kind of stuff, and there are some things that like today, the soybean market went straight in the toilet, and he's like, beans just dumped out. I was like, yeah, Trump got shot at over the weekend. I said we weren't going to talk about it. It was like, Trump got shot at over the weekend. So that's running up his chances of winning, which doesn't look good to China and China buys a bunch of beans. I said, China's dumping out of a bunch of their contracts right now because of that. So that's going to run the market down. I was like, you're in a holding pattern. I said, also, it's an election year. The markets are always volatile in an election year anyway. Like you just gotta be patient. Like it's, there are things that, and the only reason I know any of that is because I did it for a decade. And
markets like consistency.
Yeah.
So even if you have a senile old man in office and that's consistent, that's good for markets. People don't understand that. Like they're in the industry that I am in, when the Fed starts raising or lowering rates, it doesn't matter whether the rates are high or the rates are low. What's bad is that the rates are changing. And so if the rates are low, that's good. If the rates are high, that's okay, because you adapt to that. As long as the high rate is consistently high, you can build a business plan around that. But if the rates are low or are changing, either going up or going down, everybody sits on the sideline and waits until they stabilize again. And that's just a fact of life. So it doesn't matter, like you can, and this is why the thing with these systems, you could basically have a zombie corpse as president. As long as the business community feels stable, they don't care. And people, and the more that you wrap your head around those realities, the better off your politics will be.
Well, and again, and like you were saying, like that's where these systems, the systems that you build can't understand those variables that
but they want the consistency, but they can't, you're right, but they can't understand the shock of the system. And this is what Schmidt talks about in political theology, is that you reach a system where you have a crisis and somebody has to make a decision, and the system can never make there's no system that can be designed that in the moment of crisis can make that decision, and that's the key.
Well, and then the problem that we've created through all of these systems and over systemizing everything, and also feminizing the managerial class, is that nobody's willing to make the decision. It's like asking your wife where she wants to go for supper. Nobody can make the decision when it comes to the crisis point that it has to be made. And so now you're like that. I think that's my most frustrating experience with working in like corporate level management. Is things happen and it's like, there's a really obvious solution to this. Why won't somebody just say, hey, go do it? Like, and because
everybody's afraid to. This is a thing too, that the old days, you had consequences for your actions, that they would be bad, right? And people sort of sense that, if anybody actually has to take real responsibility for a decision, that this is like a life and death terrifying thing. Now, in the old days, they were always life and death terrifying, right? But that was how everything was done, is that you did things and you were held responsible for it. So you just made sure you didn't screw up. But like my dad ran, a mid-sized chemical company, $4 billion a year in revenue. And oh no, that's the global company. So his was significantly smaller than that. But anyways, I remember him saying, sort of him being at the top of the heap, and he would get interrupted on vacation, and he would just say, if I could find somebody in the company who would actually make a decision while I was gone, he says, I would double his pay on the spot. It's just like, but it's just, because they won't. And that's in a sense, you wonder sometimes why certain people end up at the top of the corporate heap, because there's always somebody in the end. Because I would say, Dad, it doesn't look like you do any real work. Right? I would say, no, I don't. He says, I get paid to make decisions. And that's, and that's really, in the end, somebody in the end has to make decisions. And that's, sovereign is he who decides the exception. And that's, these things, the political philosophers don't pull these things out of their rear end, that, this is the way the world works. Right. And it continues. And this is one of the problems inherent in the current systems environment, is that it is in the end inherently unstable, because there is always something outside the system for which the system itself cannot account for, that you cannot design a system that's good enough to account for every eventuality. You just can't.
And I think so I'll follow up with you because I want to tie that part into the church as well, and really dig more into the Christianity side of this, because I think we're coming to a head with not just with American Christianity, but with the global church, where it's going to require people who are willing to stand up and say, we have to make a decision and we have to do something. We can't keep allowing this system that we've put in place to drag us down into continued failure. Like it's not working. And so we'll follow up and go more in depth on that later on, because I think that's going to be its own conversation. But we really set the stage with just how the managerial state has immersed itself into everything, and kind of where that came from. And I feel like that's what I really wanted to kind of cover with this. And again, it gives me a lot to think about and kind of mull on too, with not just with like the church stuff. Speaking of the church stuff, like my parents' church was United Methodist. They've now they left the United Methodist Church, joined the Global Methodist, and they've been going through some growing pains with making the transition and everything. And there's some of that where people want to do things a certain way because it's the way other churches have been doing things, and the need for somebody to just make a decision on things. And you see that in other churches. It's a part of why we left the big church that we were a part of following the COVID stuff, because nobody would just make a decision, and you lack strong leadership because of the systems that are built. And the church needs strong leadership more than anything right now. So yeah, we'll dig more into that later on.
Yeah.
You got anything to add? Closing remarks? I will have links for the two specific that we talked about: managerial Christianity and technique propaganda and the left liberal nature of the West. Highly recommend go subscribe and check those out. Very good stuff for those who are listening.
I think there's a number of, even though like we do need to sort of lay out the problem of managerial Christianity, but I think in terms of the broader political context of our society is that, and I've written in several pieces on, I think the Christian community is uniquely positioned to resist the regime if it can sort of develop a properly grounded political consciousness. And that's the key, whether, the avoidance of turning Christianity into an ideology are some of the problems that, you don't want to make Christianity into just another political ideology. But I think that there's a whole range of nested problems that come along with confronting the regime that Christianity is uniquely positioned to do so. And partly I think that this contest that we're in right now is essentially a religious one, because progressivism is ultimately at its root a kind of a soteriology that we are going to save humanity through the application of progressive managerialism. And that's and this is the thing I think that in as we get towards maybe to think about as a church, is that you almost in a sense bring in an alien religion. You say, hey, let's run the church like a business. The moment that you do that, you're embracing in many ways an alien belief system and bringing it into your church. And we can talk more about that. But yeah, I mean, people can find my stuff at, seekingthehiddenthing.com. That's what the Substack is. And then my Twitter is @_Kruptos. So those are the two places where I do my stuff. The Substack is more serious, and sometimes the Twitter can be a little bit juvenile. And, I do some serious stuff there and some of unleashing my inner 15-year-old. I can be a what poster, right? So that's kind of what Twitter sort of brings out, right? If you're not doing that, you're not pushing the bounds hard enough, right?
Correct. And you do have some exceptional threads on there as well, where you do some pretty good dives into stuff. Give me an opportunity to think about things in a less juvenile way, because I almost exclusively use Twitter to
be juvenile.
To be one of those. So yeah, it's nice to pull back from being childish and actually think about things in a serious light from time to time. So yeah, check out everything that Kruptos does. Again, thank you very much. We will set up another time later on to really dig into the managerial Christianity side of it, and maybe address some of what's going on in your church for whoever's listening. I try to my Substack. I try to write about some of this type of stuff, like the problems that the church is going through, the different denominations, just churches in general, and how the lack of leadership and the lack of strong people having strong opinions and talking about them and addressing the problems has gotten us to the point that we're at. And the managerial state is definitely something that has contributed to that. So hopefully those who are listening in, next time we do this, if you're experiencing some of that stuff in your own church, maybe you'll get some ideas for how to start addressing some of it, because we need to solve this stuff, especially in the church, because the church is going to be what's leading the way coming out of a lot of the craziness we're seeing in the world, I think.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you, sir, very much, and we will talk again soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it very much so.